Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. Today on the show, the magic bullet that Chris Finch didn't exist. Does it? Was the starting lineup change really the Wolves' magic bullet? We'll talk about how Finch needs to be smart with staggering his rotations, what should work best moving forward based on what we know to this point in terms of the lineup data. We'll also preview the Wolves' magic matchup tonight. It's all coming. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode is sponsored by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Happy Thursday, everybody. Happy Timberwolves game day. The Wolves take on the Magic tonight, and we'll preview that toward the end of the show. There's a chance it's Paolo Banchero's first game played since the end of October. Crazy, just a couple days after Zion Williamson plays his first game in 2 months against the Wolves. Banchero's questionable. He may wait until Friday to play him. The Magic are on the front end of a back-to-back. We'll talk about that matchup, what to expect later in the show. I want to start with some lineup rotation stuff. It's obviously a hot topic this week after Chris Finch finally made the starting lineup change on Monday. So, funnily enough, after the loss on Saturday, the really disappointing loss to the Pistons, to put it lightly, last Saturday, Finch said he didn't think there was a, quote, magic bullet, his words, in terms of the starting lineup, or he didn't think a starting lineup change would be the magic bullet. He did it Monday. They've now won 2 consecutive games. We'll talk about, is it the magic bullet, why it might be, why it might not be. We'll also talk about potential staggered rotations, pairings that have worked better than others, etc. So we'll do that here to start the show. And, what that might mean to see, or what we might see against the Magic on Thursday night. A big thank you off the top, though, for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show's free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. You can subscribe to the daily newsletter at LockedOnDaily.com. Your one stop for all things Wolves. You'll get it Monday through Friday, some podcast notes from this show, plus some around the NBA notes, some national articles, and then links to other Wolves content. It's all there. Just subscribe at LockedOnDaily.com. You'll get it every day, Monday through Friday. All right. Let's talk about the lineup. So Chris Finch said after the Pistons game, he didn't think a starting lineup change would be the magic bullet. And basically he said, this isn't much. This is a really light paraphrase. It's pretty much what he said. If he thought it would make a big difference, he would have already done it. Well, Monday night, Mike Conley takes a seat to start the game, and Dante DiVincenzo starts. Now, the Wolves still got behind early against the Clippers on Monday. It was pretty ugly early in the first quarter, but that lineup played well in the third. It was actually kind of the reverse on Tuesday, where they got off to a much better start. They were up like 12, 14 points right away against the Pelicans, and then it was tied at halftime. And then out of the locker room, basically in the third quarter, was when the Pelicans put the screws to the Timberwolves because they didn't have a point guard on the floor. There was no Mike Conley. So the Pelicans said, hey, we're going to pressure the heck out of you up by the timeline. We're going to trap you. We're going to jump passing lanes. We're going to get a Zion 360 dunk in the middle of an actual close NBA game because we're going to get just easy pickings here, turning you over. So mixed results in terms of that actual lineup. It's obviously too early to know whether or not this was a magic bullet, but it allows Chris Finch to do some other stuff with the rotation throughout the game. And it honestly, like, it's a little bit silly because there's no rule, right? Like, I referenced this the other day, but like back when, and I maybe remembering, I don't know, maybe this is a selective memory on this, but back in the Timberwolves 2003-2004 Western Conference Finals year, Irvin Johnson would start at center and play like 6 minutes at each half and then not see the floor again. Like, there's no rule on like starters needing to return, or like you can't, you could pull a guy after 3 minutes, like, but you have to consider the rhythm that guys need to be in. You have to consider, obviously the politics of such a move, which I talked about on Monday's show coming out of Saturday's Pistons game. Like, you got to put some of the politics aside. If there's a lineup or a rotation move that's best for the team, full stop, you got to set some of the other stuff aside. But at some level, it's all got to factor into the stew, right? Well, what Chris Finch did, what this allows him to do, and actually most recently what he did against New Orleans, is the substitution pattern that he can go with is to bring Mike Conley as part of his first substitution in the first quarter and leave Rudy Gobert on the floor. And Conley and Gobert still get to play together with Randle off the floor. Any Mike Conley lineup this season with Julius Randle is a bad lineup. And we can blame Mike. We can blame Julius. Truth is, they're probably both to blame. They both are to blame for not playing to where we'd expect them to this year. I shouldn't say they're all bad. Mostly they're bad. There's one good one, and they've only played 50 possessions together, and that's Conley and Randle with Ant, Rudy, and Nickeil Alexander-Walker. They played 50 possessions, and they're a plus 20, basically a plus 30. But overall, Conley and Randle together have played over 1,100 possessions, and they're a 47th percentile. Any lineup with the two of those guys is a 47th percentile lineup. They're a negative offensively, a minus 1.2 offensive differential, which is a 29th percentile offensive unit. Defensively, they're fine. They're 69th percentile, but not as good as most Wolves defensive lineups, and obviously not good enough to offset how bad the offense is. So it's a 47th percentile unit overall when you've got Conley and Randle on the floor. Now, like more than 3/4 of those lineups, a little more than 3/4 of those lineups with the two of them on the floor is the old starting lineup, right? That starting five of Mike, Ant, McDaniels, Rudy, and Julius Randle. So for whatever that's worth, but those lineups are just not good. And so what Finch did against the Pelicans on Tuesday, I think he did this Monday against the Clippers too, is Mike Conley can be part of that first substitution. I think it's Conley and Nas come in, and Randle and Dante can sit. So now Conley and Randle aren't playing together, but you get Conley and Gobert together, which, as we know, going back to their time together in Utah, we know that Mike Conley and Rudy Gobert are a positive pairing together all the time. And that's still the case this year, even with both of them struggling at times. They're 70th percentile lineup together. Now, offensively, it's not all that much better than I just realized I was looking at these numbers wrong a minute ago. Well, what I said was 100% correct. They're still a 47th percentile unit, that pairing of Conley and Randle together. What I looked at wrong was I said they were a minus 1.2 differential. They're a 29th percentile offense, not a 47th percentile offense. It's a 47th percentile lineup and a 29th percentile offense, which is really bad. The lineups with Conley and Gobert are a 70th percentile unit, and it's a +4 offensively, and they're an 84th percentile defense. Like it's night and day. It's essentially a 4 or 5 point swing in terms of differential. Rudy and Mike versus Mike and Julius together. That's the point. So the first sub allows Conley and Gobert to play together. They only played about 2.5 minutes together in the first quarter against the Pelicans. But then in the second quarter, Chris Finch can come back with, Rudy takes his rest at the end of the first quarter through the first part of the second quarter. Conley takes a rest in there too. Then they can both come back at about the midway point of the second quarter. They played the last 6 minutes together in the first quarter against the Pelicans the other night. And the overall, they basically played it to a wash in terms of, I think the Wolves had a slight lead. They actually relinquished it over the course of the rest of the second quarter. But I think that was more of an anomaly than anything else, because we know, again, historically, Conley and Rudy are a great pairing together. With Julius Randle on the court, not so much. And one of the things that I talked about, I think on yesterday's show, I think it was Wednesday's show, was that Conley off the bench makes more sense because he can be the primary initiator or a secondary creator for himself or others, whereas with the starting lineup with Julius Randle and Anthony Edwards, he's now third in the pecking order of who's bringing the ball up the court and actually, initiate any sort of offense, which is not a position he's used to being in. When he's coming off the bench, he's almost always going to be the second option to do that. And this allows him to do exactly that by being out there with the bench unit. And there's the added benefit of there's just more space if he's not playing with both Randle and Gobert, which is one of the reasons why for a while I'd been saying like, hey, maybe Randle with the second unit. And of course the politics thing, I get it. But in general, that could provide more space. It prevents you from having Randle, Ant, and Conley on the floor all at the same time, and Randle and Gobert at the same time. Like some of the stuff that's not super synergistic if you will, can be avoided by simply bringing Mike Conley off the bench, which is exactly what they're doing. So I think we can look for that where, Conley plays 2-3 minutes with Gobert in the first quarter, 6 minutes with him in the second quarter, and they can kind of copy and paste that into the second half of the game. And depending on the game, Chris Finch can choose to close it with whatever makes the most sense based on the game flow, the hot hand, the opponent, what the matchup looks like. So, we've seen a lot of Dante closing recently. Tuesday, we saw Mike Conley close the game, and it worked out just fine. So that's where Chris Finch is going to make his money, right? Is pulling the right levers, pushing the right buttons down the stretch of these games. What's the right combination of guys to have on the floor? And I think for the most part, outside of a couple notable exceptions, he's done a pretty good job with that. And, the willingness to make this lineup change, even if it did take a little bit too long, we'll see how this all shakes out. But so far, it looks decent. I want to talk about a couple more lineup things related to the Timberwolves starting lineup specifically, and then we'll move on to the Magic matchup. So we'll do all that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our title sponsors over at Game Time. I love going to live events, whether it's sports, music, theater, or comedy. My wife and I go to all of the above. We love all sports. I love attending basketball games and baseball games live in person, and Game Time's the go-to place to do that. We'll also go, my wife's a big theater fan, so we'll go see Broadway. We'll occasionally go to stand-up shows and traveling Broadway shows. We've been to Broadway in New York too, and Game Time is a great place to find tickets for that as well. And the occasional concert. I like really all kinds of music. And Game Time's the best way to get tickets. And now they've made it even easier to get tickets for your favorite events with their new feature, Game Time Picks. This feature filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Recently, I was looking for tickets on Game Time, and Game Time Picks is exactly what helped. Amazing deals. You can see the view from your seat before buying. You name it, you can do it over there at Game Time, and specifically with Game Time Picks. You can take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA. That's LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game Time. Today's episode is also brought to us by Rocket RX. If you're ready to boost your confidence and take control in the bedroom, Rocket RX has the solution. Imagine feeling more prepared and performing at your best. Rocket RX makes it simple and stress-free. Rocket RX offers FDA-approved treatments for erectile dysfunction at a lower cost than branded alternatives. No more uncomfortable doctor visits or pharmacy trips. Everything is delivered straight to your door in discreet, plain packaging. With Rocket RX, you get trusted care from a real U.S. clinical team. Complete a quick 100% online consultation, and you could get your free prescription today. Visit rocketrx.com to get started now. It only takes 2 minutes. Right now, our listeners can get 40% off your first order when you use the code LOCKEDONNBA. That's rocketrx.com, code LOCKEDONNBA for 40% off your first order. Terms and conditions apply. Rocket RX, better sex made simple. All right, so we've established that to this point, through 2 games, albeit a painfully small sample, we've seen that Mike Conley coming in with the bench unit, being able to play with Naz, being able to play with Rudy as part of that staggered rotation, and moving. We didn't even talk about Dante today. I did that a bit the last couple days. But the short version is he can be more aggressive with the starting unit. Weirdly enough, because he's on the floor with Ant, but him getting off the ball and Ant getting off the ball, to have 2 dynamic scorers that are in the backcourt that both can shoot the 3 with the range that they can and the ability to put it on the floor, it's different than Ant and Randle together. And it's different for Dante to be able to be with the starting lineup and have that, he doesn't have to worry about initiating for others, because he is the one who's going to be the beneficiary of the gravity of Anthony Edwards and at times the gravity of Julius, or the presence of Rudy in the paint, whatever it might be. Rudy finding Dante in a short roll, but Dante doesn't have to initiate offense like he did when he was effectively the point guard with the second unit. So I think that's going to be a good thing for DiVincenzo as well. And then the other piece of this that I think is pretty hilarious isn't the right word, because it's, I guess if it wasn't so frustrating, it would be hilarious. So the Timberwolves have a total of, it's 8 lineups. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, 8 lineups that have played at least 100 possessions together. So on cleaning the glass, that's the minimum number of possessions that a five-man lineup can play in order to get a percentile rank in cleaning the glass, because it's a big enough sample for them to do that. Of the 8 lineups that have played at least 100 possessions together, there are only 3 that are at or below 50th percentile, which we'll call, I guess it's basically the league, the average or median. I don't know, 50th percentile. There's 3 lineups of the top 8 in terms of possessions played that are below 50th percentile or below. 2 of them are the 2 starting lineups that we've seen. The preferred, the regular starting lineup, if you will, that was the starting lineup, save for a couple games Conley missed earlier this year, and then before the change on Monday, Conley, Edwards, McDaniels, Randle, Gobert. That's a 50th percentile lineup. A plus 1.2 differential, 43rd percentile offensively, and a very, we'll call it tepid 53rd percentile defensively. The other lineup, which is the absolute worst lineup so far this season for the Wolves, is the new starting lineup, which is no Conley plus DiVincenzo. So yes, despite everything I just said for the season, albeit in a quarter of as many possessions, just over 200 possessions instead of about 850 possessions, the Ant DiVincenzo backcourt with McDaniels, Randle, Gobert is actually worse. They're a minus 4.5 and 34th percentile. However, I believe this is somewhat small sample size related, and I do believe that Dante and Ant together, as I said a moment ago, are a solid pairing. To this point in the season, overall, those two together are all units together with those two are 71st percentile. They're a plus 4.1. They're 67th percentile offensively and 70th percentile defensively. The lineup with them that's the most successful is an interesting hybrid bench starting lineup rotation. Well, I say that DiVincenzo's not a member of the bench anymore, but it's the bench trio, the artist formerly known as the bench trio, DiVincenzo, Alexander Walker, and Naz Reid, plus Ant and Julius Randle, are an 84th percentile unit, a plus 19 on the season. Compare that to the new starting lineup, which is Ant, DiVincenzo, and Randle with McDaniels and Gobert instead of Alexander Walker and Reid, a 34th percentile unit, which is a minus 4.5. That is a 23.5 point differential there. Net rating differential, if you will. So, in summary, the new starting lineup is actually the Wolves' worst starting lineup of the 8 most used lineups they've had this season. But because of all the things I've cited with Dante and Ant playing together, I believe it will be on the upswing. I think that it will overall be a better unit. And not only will it be better in the long run than the old starting lineup, I think it will allow for, as we talked about in the first segment, the staggered rotation of less Julius and Mike Conley together, more Conley and Gobert ultimately, maybe not more than when they started together, but similar amount, and less of the Conley and Randle together, and more of DiVincenzo playing with Anthony Edwards, which I think is a really important thing. And it seems weird because he's your best, bench threat in terms of scoring consistently, at least in the backcourt, combined with your best overall player. And a lot of times you try and stagger those. But I think having Randle play with the bench unit more often over the course of the game is actually going to be better for the Wolves overall offensively. So I think it's a pretty intriguing kind of way to look at this. I'm really curious to see how Finch handles the staggered rotations here moving forward. I should note that the best lineup percentile-wise of those 8, only 125 possessions, but of the 8, 5 of them have less than 200, is a lineup, the only lineup of the 8 that has Josh Minott in it, and it doesn't have Anthony Edwards, which is there's 2 lineups of the top 8 that don't have Ant, and only one that has Josh Minott, and this lineup is both. DiVincenzo, Alexander Walker, Josh Minott, Julius Randle, and Naz Reid. I think if you'd given me 7 to 10 if you'd given me 10 cracks at it, I'm not sure I would have come up with that as a lineup, like as a combination that would have been ranked this well. 125 possessions of DiVincenzo, Alexander Walker, Minott, Randle, and Reid is a plus 29 differential, 97th percentile offensive unit, and a 75th percentile defensive unit. And I'd be willing to bet they play pretty fast, which is kind of an ongoing topic we haven't covered a lot recently, but the overall, transition opportunities for Minnesota, like there's a lot more upside there that the Wolves need to capitalize on depending on opponent. And actually we'll talk a little bit about that when it comes to the Magic game, which we're going to preview here next. I have a lot to say about this matchup. I think it's pretty intriguing and actually a really good test for Minnesota, whether or not Paolo Banchero plays. So we'll do that here next. That's how we'll close out the show. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at Ultimate College Basketball HC. I want to take a moment to introduce you to a brand new mobile game that I'm really excited about, Ultimate College Basketball HC. If you've ever dreamed about being a college basketball head coach, this is your chance to step into those shoes. In Ultimate College Basketball HC, you control every detail of your program, from recruiting players and hiring coaching staff to overseeing training camps, handling NIL deals, and managing scholarships. It's all in your hands. And when it comes to game time, you get to drop offensive plays and set your strategy. The way you play won't affect just the current season. It will also shape the future of your school's basketball program. It's a game that lets you feel the full weight of what it means to be a head coach and lead your team to glory. Here's a special offer for Locked On NBA listeners. Use the promo code LOCKEDONCBB, all caps, inside the game store to get a free boost for your program. Again, that's Locked On CBB, all caps. It's the perfect way to kickstart your coaching career. To download Ultimate College Basketball HC, just visit ultimate-cbb.com, ultimate-cbb.com, or look it up in your app store. Ultimate College Basketball HC. Begin your coaching legacy today. All right, let's talk about this Magic matchup. Orlando, if you haven't been paying attention, has had a really weird season. Paolo Banchero started out like gangbusters, 5 games played early this season, 29 points a game, shooting almost 50% from the field, like just doing all the like baby LeBron stuff that people that really like him. I was full transparency. I was a little bit lower on him as a prospect and actually liked, well, we don't need to talk about how I was wrong about that draft. Banchero's been better than I expected. I think at times people get a little too excited about him, but I don't want to take anything away. He was great in the first 5 games. And Orlando, despite that, has continued to be great. And then they've had a ton of injuries. Like Franz Wagner got hurt a while back, like early December, and he should be, like initially they said about a month. It's been about a month, but he's missed a ton of time. His brother, Mo Wagner, is out for the season, tore his ACL a couple of weeks ago. And so neither Wagner is playing. Jalen Suggs fell earlier this week, and it looked like it was going to be a lot more serious, left in a wheelchair, and it sounds like it's a back injury. He should play at some point in the next few days, but I think they've already ruled him out actually for the Wolves game on Thursday night. So no Suggs, neither Wagner. Banchero's only played 5 games this season. He's now questionable Thursday. They upgraded him to questionable. I think Shams first reported on Thursday. So if he doesn't play Thursday against the Wolves, he'll play Friday on the second night of their back-to-back. If he does play Thursday, I don't know. Who knows if he would play the second night on Friday. But how crazy is it the Wolves could get the first Zion game in 2 months on Tuesday, and then the first Banchero game in 3 months plus on Thursday? That could happen. All that to say, like, if you had told me before the season that, like, this was all going to happen, like Suggs would leave in a wheelchair, both Wagners are out for anywhere from a month to the end of the season, and Banchero is out for multiple months, that this team would be 22-16 and first in their division and 4th in the conference on January 9th, I would have told you were crazy. But here we are, which is a credit to Jamal Mosley's coaching, obviously. This seems very close to identical production-wise as what they were last year. Last season, they were a top 3 defense, and they were one of the league's worst offenses. This year, they're 2nd in defensive rating, and they're 26th in offensive rating. So pretty much what you'd expect. The Magic are the worst 3-point shooting team in the league. They shoot a fair amount. The middle of the pack in terms of attempts. They're 13th in 3-point attempt rate. They're 18th in attempts per game because they play at a really slow pace. We'll talk about that. But the guys who shoot threes for this team are not good. Like Suggs shoots 7 threes a game and he's 31%. Banchero hasn't played, but he's a below league average 3-point shooter. Wagner is out, but he was 32% at shooting 6.5 per game. Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, who's a big addition for them, is only scoring 9 points a game. He's a starter. He plays 31 minutes, but he's only scoring 9 points a game, and he's shooting 31% on threes on 5 attempts per game. There's not a single guy in this rotation besides Gary Harris, who's also been hurt, who's above league average from 3. That's it. At least guys who like are supposed to be part of the rotation. Like Trevelyan Queens played a little bit for them recently. Like he played the other night, limited minutes. He's shooting 46%. It hasn't gotten a lot of attempts up, but like Wendell Carter Jr.'s came off the bench the other night for them. He started a lot for them this year too. He's shooting 21% from three, and he shoots a couple a game. Like, this is a team that's relatively high volume, but very low success. 31% as a team, dead last in the NBA. And weirdly, they also play really slow. They're dead last in pace league-wide. So they're dead last in pace. They're dead last in three-point shooting. They get to the line a decent amount. You have to in order to like be functional as an offense if you're also not going to make threes or play fast. They're seventh in free throw rate. They're sixth in free throw rate offensively. And, you know, they're a good free throw shooting team too, top half of the league. So like, and with Banchero, that number is only going to go up. Now not having the Wagners is going to hurt them a lot in terms of getting to the free throw line. Like, they just don't have that many other guys that get to the line a ton. Like, since the Wagners have gotten hurt, like that number is going to continue to dip. And I really have questions about how this offense is going to function. Even once Banchero is back, the Wagners were really important for both three-point shooting and getting to the line. How else are they going to generate offense? Like, they're going to need a little bit more from Suggs in that regard when he gets back. But all that to say, this is a team that the Wolves should be able to lock down defensively. There just aren't that many redeeming qualities, frankly, about the Magic offensively without Paolo Banchero. However, the challenge is on the flip side, the Magic are the number 2 defense in the league behind only the Thunder, who have been just utterly dominant this season. They are number 2 in opponent turnover rate, next to only Oklahoma City. And we saw how the Wolves struggled with the Thunder's defense last week. We saw how they struggled with the Pelicans defense earlier this week when New Orleans decided to try and press up on the timeline and trap the Wolves. I mean, this is a New Orleans team. This was a New Orleans team that they're a good defense. I take that back. They haven't been a good defense, but they're good at what I meant to say is they're good at forcing turnovers. They were top half of the league, like top 12 or something in terms of opponent turnover rate. We talked about some of the individual defenders New Orleans has. I mean, like, that's nothing compared to what the Magic can do. Now, Jalen Suggs not playing is a big deal, but this is still a team that's going to try and generate a ton of turnovers, and yet they don't play fast. But if they can be opportunistic, force turnovers, and get easy buckets on the other side, even if they're not like trying to run, they're not going to run after makes, right? Like Orlando, that's not what they're going to do. But if they can force you to turn the ball over and they can get a dunk in transition, they'll do that. They'll be opportunistic and take those easy buckets because their offense needs it in order to survive. Because they're not getting open three-pointers that they're converting in the half court. They're not getting to the line enough without the Wagners and Banchero. So they're going to try and force turnovers. Minnesota has got to take care of the basketball. And I feel like that could be number one on every single game preview all season. They've actually got a little better, but they're still 22nd in the league in turnover rate. Minnesota is. And like, if they turn it over, if they can avoid the turnovers against Orlando, they should be just fine. However, this matchup scares me. To me, it's a lot like the Pelicans matchup, except for Orlando's a better team. Just up and down is a better team, and that scares me. If you're Minnesota, don't turn it over. Minnesota actually, weirdly, should push the pace against a team like Orlando because their half-court defense is so good when they're set, and Orlando doesn't want to play fast themselves. So as long as Minnesota can kind of take care of the basketball, they should be able to push it and be okay. Offensive rebounding is another thing. Like, you got to look out for like Wendell Carter. You got to look out for Jonathan Isaac off the bench is another big factor on the offensive glass. Those are probably the main. Goga Batase as well. Like those are all guys who could kill the Wolves with second chance opportunities. That's another thing that often is an issue for Minnesota, and they've got to pay attention to it in this game. If they can do an okay job in the defensive glass, if they can push the pace a little bit and not turn it over too many times, I think the Wolves will be okay in this game. The FanDuel line is Minnesota favored by 4 at Orlando. I think the expectation is Banchero doesn't play. Now, historically, whether or not this matters, I don't know. The Wolves don't often play well in Orlando, so for whatever that's worth, factor that in if you want to take Minnesota -4 at FanDuel. I don't know that I would. I just worry about that matchup a bit. And could the Wolves be looking ahead to some of the upcoming matchups? Possibly. So that would make me just a little bit nervous. Orlando, they're coming off a nice win. I mean, they beat, albeit a banged-up Knicks team with no Karl-Anthony Towns. Other guys missing the game as well. But they beat the Knicks by 9 the other day. Yeah, by 9 the other day, and they've basically been alternating wins and losses for a while. Like, they lost to the Jazz by 13. They lost to the Pistons by 9. I mean, the Wolves lost to the Pistons too, but they lost to a really Heat team, recently. So like it's a very winnable game. I'd be a little bit nervous about taking the Wolves -4 if I were you, but that's just my 2 cents on that. All right. That's all we got for you today. Of course, we'll have the live postcast following on Locked On Sports Minnesota on YouTube. You can watch our guys Luke and Jack break it down at Locked On Sports Minnesota on YouTube. That audio will be available right here. It'll be the next episode after this one in your feed on Locked On Wolves audio feed, and then I'll be back on Friday morning for the Locked On Wolves post-game pod that will post early on Friday. Big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere, including YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. And a reminder, you can subscribe to the newsletter at LockedOnDaily.com, and it'll be your one-stop shop for all things Wolves. Of course, the Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.